Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would like to continue on our journey and discussion through the Criterion Collection releases made during this year of 2020, and in particular, those films that can be found in this splendid set, which is called Three Films by Luis Buñuel. And the film in question that I'd like to focus on today is given the spine number 290. This is from 1974. The title in French is Le Fantôme de la Liberté. In English, it is known as The Phantom of Liberty. This is a film from producer Serge Silberman and a screenplay from Luis Buñuel in collaboration once again with Jean-Claude Carrière, and of course directed by Luis Buñuel. This is the 1974 classic work called The Phantom of Liberty. Like with all other works by Luis Buñuel, this is such a brilliantly multifaceted, multidimensional work that is, I dare say, many things at once at the same time. Again, this is true for all of his works and is definitely true for The Phantom of Liberty. One of the things that this film, I think, is very directly and quite accessibly a laugh out loud, ultra hilarious, outrageous comedy that is a comedy of errors, a comedy of manners. It is a sex comedy. It is a comedy filled with highbrow humor, lowbrow humor. There are stories involving cutting edge, almost disturbing, chilling subject matter that still is absurdist, quite surreal and bold and inventive and totally surprising. So this is, on the whole, a vivid and dynamic work of comedy from Luis Buñuel. And to be even more specific, it is a comedy that is structured in terms of its construction on the notion of the short story or the vignette-based sketch comedy. This is a story that is a collection, essentially, of various sketches, various short stories, various situations that are true, linked in a certain manner that is both cinematic and also thematic. But they are, in essence, their own little stories, their own little situations that go from one story to the other, to the other, to the other, to the other, throughout the course of its running time. And as I was trying to indicate a few moments ago, there are a multitude, a really wide-ranging sense of variety, because we have different sets of characters, we have different little scenarios that have their own beginning, middles, and ends, so to speak, and their own sets of jokes and their own follow-throughs and conclusions. And some of them range from very much dealing with daily living or daily life. Others range about being about specific situations, from the seemingly quote-unquote innocent to the more daring or cutting edge. Some involve parents and children. Others involve, say, matters or situations involving sadomasochism. Others involve figures of religion. Others involve figures of history. There are some relationships that might be said to be depicting acts of violence. There might be other situations depicting incestuous matters and situations. There could be absurdist moments involving authorities and figures of maybe power structures. There might be situations that have this cold, chilling edge to them, but that also have this absurdist, funny spin, and so on and so forth. So there is this huge variety that we get, as I say, in the course of what is essentially a kind of sketch comedy work. So we are getting an outrageous, it must be seen to be believed type of situation. But that's what we can expect, and that's why we love Buñuel the way we do, because he gives us these situations, like in The Phantom of Liberty, that are so charming and so timeless and very thought-provoking, and oh yes, oh so funny and laugh out loud hilarious. So The Phantom of Liberty is this comedy, and it is many multifaceted type of comedy. But when we think about the, for example, construction of the humor and comedic set pieces, when we think about the jokes and the construction of those jokes and how those jokes are followed through to their climaxes or conclusions, another way to put that is the butts of the jokes. When we think about the subject matters, I think we can begin to realize that alongside being a comedy, this film is also a type of satire, a cutting-edge, bold satire that once again is an example of Luis Buñuel using his metaphorical cinematic razor. Some might call it the surrealist edge of Luis Buñuel, but it is that razor that he is using to cut through and expose what it is the subject matter is from the viewpoint of Luis Buñuel and company. And depending on your point of view, my friends, depending on your perspective and interpretation, what it is he is exposing when we see a film like The Phantom of Liberty could be, for example, the truth. Maybe it is something of the repressed. Maybe it is something of the rot that is setting in society. Who knows? Whatever the case may be, and however you view it, my friends, undoubtedly, Luis Buñuel is slicing through this and giving us, through his perspective, through his sharp, keen-eyed lens, his outtake on these very situations. So this is yet another example of the, let's say, philosophy, if you will, the cinematic philosophy of Buñuel on display with so much energy and robust rigor and detail and charm that, as I say, make Buñuel's films so wonderful and so timeless. Now, when we think further about what it is exactly that he is, quote-unquote, exposing, I think we get a number of various possibilities as far as discussion points. And again, this is one of the great things about Buñuel and The Phantom of Liberty, is that there are many ways to try to interpret what it is that's going on in this, as I say, multifaceted film that is many things all at once. If we were to try to think about the various specific scenarios and situations, I think we can begin to, let's say, on the one hand, walk away with a sense that maybe this film is focusing in on the sense of what it is to be free, the idea of the meaning of liberty in various aspects of society, and therefore what the meaning of liberty is on a macro scale. Also, how characters in various situations try to achieve what it is that idea or sense of liberty means, or maybe to be even more precise, what it is they either think is a sense of being free, or what it is they are otherwise repressing, and what is otherwise coming out in forms of characters that are, say, in a sense of regression, or characters that are repressed but maybe find these moments of explosive freedom in expressing what it is they are otherwise not allowed to say or not willing to say in public, etc. And so we have not just the examination or spotlight on what freedom or liberty is, but also the ways in which these various characters in these situations seem to be, in various forms and modes, trying to achieve or otherwise experience or otherwise live a sense of liberty. Now, that might be an illusion, that might be true, that might be false, and again, it's from your point of view. Is it the rot that he's exposing? Is it the truth that he's exposing? Is it the absurdity that Buñuel is exposing? But I think in each of these scenarios, I think we get a certain working or dealing with these various types of themes that are also, of course, arguably one and the same. And so what do we mean when we think about the sense of liberty or freedom? Again, we have this phrase, la liberté, liberty, that is part of the title. A lot has been made, and I think quite rightly so. For example, Peter William Evans in the essay, or in the discussion that is part of this criterion presentation. One of his arguments is, of course, the idea that Buñuel, among other things, is treating liberty as a sense of something that is illusory or something that is really a facade or not true, because he argues, and I think quite reasonably, that what it is that many of the characters seem to be expressing as a type of acts of freedom or liberty or expressions of liberty are themselves contradictory. And because they're contradictory, they might not even be actual acts of liberty to begin with. So already we have these sets of contradictions that lead to the idea of this illusion of liberty, and if it's an illusion, then it comes in. Then the question as to whether it is indeed true or not becomes part of the analysis. So, for example, we might have characters that are subjected to these power structures, like Napoleonic forces oppressing various Spanish fighter prisoners, and so we have this maybe traditional based or generally accepted story situation of the powerful versus the oppressed. And in that way, I think it's very natural for a viewer or for anyone who is being exposed to this type of story or situation to want to side with the oppressed. And because there is a sense of the nature of freedom or liberty, and what it is they are fighting for is the notion of being free. And this is not just a political issue, but it's also a very literary and romantic one at that. So this is a very natural inclination in all walks of cinema and literature. But what Buñuel does here as an example is he turns that notion on its head. And when he does this, he, in essence, tells us that perhaps those that are in the position of being the oppressed are just as, say, deluded as those that are in positions of power. In other words, even the oppressed and what it is they are searching when they cry out for freedom maybe are these power structures that are in the end just as corrupt and just as oppressive as those forces that they are confronting in the first place. So whatever power or whatever situation that people seem to be yearning for and people seem to be calling as situations of freedom or liberty, I think those situations are being called into question by Buñuel himself. So therein lies the dilemma or contradiction, if you will. What it is we think as situations of being free or being expressing or experiencing the sensation of liberty. And are those really true or are those illusory? I mean, the example that I'm citing to is the very famous opening scenario involving the Napoleonic forces against the oppressed Spanish prisoners. And this is, of course, among other things, an homage to Goya. But it is also, as I say, this ability or this opportunity for Buñuel and company to essentially turn this notion of the oppressed on its head, and thus giving us, I think, much food for thought as to what it is liberty actually is, and does it really exist, or is it just an illusion that is ephemeral and ultimately unobtainable? And this type of consideration, I think, has its echoes throughout the entirety of the work and in various expressions throughout the many scenarios that make up this tapestry or sketch comedy work that is The Phantom of Liberty. And so, for example, we have characters that seem to be living in what seems to be a type of democratic society or society based on a sense of order and societal norms. But even in those societal norms, we have expressions of confusion, of disorder, of chaos. There is another famous episode involving acts of violence that are expressed out in public in a very chaotic and frightening way, which in turn can be said to be their own expressions of freedom. how dangerous are those expressions of freedom, right? I mean, people seem to be expressing freedom at the but those expressions cost people their lives because it means life and death. So freedom in the context of life and death, in the context of social cost as well. And what does that social cost lead to? Does it lead to a sense of righteousness and justice and order? Or does it lead to a further absurdist take on the nature of society and celebrity and violence? And so these avenues, I would suggest, lead one to consider and really take into account that the Phantom of Liberty is perhaps telling us that these characters and their attempts at trying to maintain a sense of freedom or liberty are in fact going down these paths that are themselves quite absurd. And what does that say, not just about the nature of these characters, but also about what it is they're trying to reach for? So what does it say about these people, and what does it say about the freedom or liberty that they seem to be trying to be reaching towards, their goals, as it were? And this, too, brings us to another opportunity to examine also these characters in these various walks of life, in these various, say, social class-based strata. So we have, for example, gatherings, meals, or societal settings, but in fact it's not the meal, but it's quite opposite indeed, having to do with bodily functions rather than the act of eating, and the whole idea of conventions about what is accepted table manners versus what is unaccepted table manners is turned on its head. And these are expressions of freedom, but they are also examined in a way that make us realize that these social conventions that are seemingly in place in an attempt to try to maintain a sense of order that seem to be, on paper anyway, established to try to give people and the citizenry a sense of freedom to do, quote-unquote, what it is they want, within bounds, of course. These might be just as absurd and random and chaotic as, say, a totally separate set of rules and orders. And so I think that's the point that we're getting at here, is that not only is the goal somewhat absurd, but maybe the means by which society or daily living or our own notions of the generally accepted, those rules might themselves be absurd as well. They certainly are when examined through the lens that is Louise Buñuel's film, The Phantom of Liberty. And so I think that is at the very heart, or it could be said to be one way of looking at this film, and at the very heart, based on that perspective. And in that, of course, we get, as I was mentioning earlier, ways in which we can examine the absurdity of certain class conventions that lead to the absurdity of certain political perspectives and also historical perspectives. And so we get a socio-political and the temporal and the day-to-day living all combined in these various sets of stories and situations and set pieces. And this is the brilliance of Buñuel and the world that he has in his hands when he's presenting us this film, The Phantom of Liberty. And this is why I think this is another great prime example of the genius that is Buñuel. Once again, he is cutting through and exposing what it is that's underneath. And he's doing it in this way that is still very biting, very cutting edge, and oh yes, oh so funny. So this is the film from Louise Buñuel, that is The Phantom of Liberty. So we have this new box set, or this Blu-ray set, and included in which is this film, The Phantom of Liberty. This had been in the Criterion Collection previously as this DVD, and that's why it's at spine number 290. And it was a great DVD, by the way. It was really wonderful. But it is also wonderful to have this in this Blu-ray presentation from the Criterion Collection. And if we look at the booklet, and I will speak about the contents of the booklet with a little bit more detail in a separate video. But for now, if we think about the presentation, it is described on page 54 of the booklet as being the new digital transfer for The Phantom of Liberty was created in high definition from a 35mm interpositive and 35mm magnetic tracks. by Studio Canal. So what we have here is something that is a film that we saw earlier. The film was great, I thought, in this earlier presentation, but we have this great Blu-ray presentation, as I say, in this box set. And part of that, too, is the collection of supplements that we have together with this particular disc. What are those supplements, by the way? So first we have the short, approximately 5-minute interview with Jean-Claude Carrière, and this is from 2000. And so we can find also the discussion with Jean-Claude Carrière here in the earlier DVD. This is really, really wonderful because it's wonderful for a number of reasons. For example, Jean-Claude Carrière is speaking so elegantly and so forcefully about the sort of brilliant, absurdist, chaotic nature of this work. And he speaks about it in terms that I think are themselves reflective of the myriad, almost elusive nature of what this film is. And so I love that expression. And I think that is so beautifully characteristic of the almost wildly multifaceted nature that is the Phantom of Liberty. And he also gives this great expression about how the film is at its core something about the contradiction. And that contradiction is something about what is both irrational and true. Let me say that again. Something about what is both irrational and true. And I think this is so profound. Jean-Claude Carrière then goes to give us an example, one of the stories, which is one of the most famous stories of this film, The Phantom of Liberty, involving the story of the missing girl, the missing young school child, and that story and how it plays out. And for those of you who haven't seen the film, it's one of the famous moments. And so Jean-Claude Carrière uses this as an example of something that is irrational and true, and this is at the heart of the brilliance of the Phantom of Liberty. So a great talk from Jean-Claude Carrière, again, approximately 5 minutes. And then we have another one-on-one interview or discussion, this time with Peter William Evans. This is from 2017, approximately 20 minutes. And this is also quite essential because Peter William Evans is giving us a very detailed way in which we can view and read the Phantom of Liberty. And he's talking, as I say, about these notions of liberty, and he links it, for example, quite appropriately so, to the notion of the specter of communism, the Communist Manifesto, and the specter of communism, the Phantom of Liberty. And so we have this linkage already in terms of almost a kind of political viewpoint that it seems to be enmeshed or entwined with this notion of liberty. And that leads to situations of social conscious-based type of filmmaking, but also situations of an absurdist level. Because, as I say, and I think Peter William Evans makes this argument very forcefully, is that while there seems to be this connection, perhaps in a spiritual way, to the notion of the oppressed and to the notion of the socially conscious, there's also this way in which Buñuel turns that on its head to create an absurdist take as to the true or illusory nature of what we otherwise might see as being socially conscious perspectives in cinema. So this is very, very important. Peter William Evans goes on to talk about the allusions to Goya and to Ferdinand VII, and also he talks about the gratuitous act and André Gide, and he talks about the regressive nature and the Oedipal complex, and he talks about cultural anthropology, Margaret Mead, and so and other allusions of that nature and references of that nature. And so it is a very robust conversation, and it goes in places that I think are quite detailed. But his presentation is very, I would say, very accessible, and so highly highly recommended if you can check it out. So this is, again, from 2017. So this is the discussion with Peter William Evans on the work, The Phantom of Liberty. And then we have another supplement, which is approximately 5 minutes. And this is the 1974 episode, Pour le Cinéma. And this is a discussion or set of interviews, one with Michel Piccoli and the other with Jean-Claude Brialy, excuse me. And these are great because each speak to the working relationship that they have with Louis Buñuel, and also in particular the context with regard to this film. And so they both say, for example, that Louis Buñuel's film is very much like, or The Phantom of Liberty is very much like a film made by a young man. And so they speak about, I think, the freshness and the novelty and the boldness of this film, The Phantom of Liberty. And I think those are really great comments. This does feel like this feels like a film made by someone with this youthful energy, this almost fearless nature. And that is so amazing. Again, considering that this film comes, as I say, at the tail end of Buñuel's illustrious career. So it's a marvelous set of interviews and well worth checking out. Again, the 1974 episode Pour le Cinéma, approximately 5 minutes. And then continuing on the supplements, we get another episode or excerpt from French television, Le Dernier des Cinq, from 1974. And this is approximately 6 minutes. This is also with Jean-Claude Brialy, and he is speaking again about working with Louis Buñuel, about the context of this film, about the artistic inspiration in this working relationship with Buñuel and other matters. Another essential, enlightening examination and window into the working relationship of this great actor and also of the great director. So another thing to check out, really worth it. And then we have a beautiful documentary. It's approximately 30 minutes from 1985. And this is a documentary on Serge Silberman. And of course, as we know, Serge Silberman is a very important producer figure in the context of parts or many important aspects of Louis Buñuel's career, including, of course, The Phantom of Liberty. But if Serge Silberman has worked with Buñuel, he has also worked with other very famous filmmakers, and all the way leading up to 1985 and the time of the making of the film, and Akira Kurosawa as well. So, but Buñuel and Silberman's relationship is one of the key core relationships in cinema in the 20th century, and it's great to see this spotlight given to the producer, arguably one of the most important figures in this part of Buñuel's career. So it's wonderful to see his comments, and he's very down to earth, he's very calm, and he's not flashy or showy in his comments at all. And so but he maintains this sense of control and this sense of spirit and energy, and a real sense of force, if you will. So it's a real marvel and wonder to have this as part of the supplement. So again, the Focus documentary, 30 minutes on Serge Silberman. And then we have the trailer to round out the supplements. The Phantom of Liberty, my dear friends, is one of the greats. It comes at the latter part of Buñuel's career, and expresses a lot that we might see during this period of Buñuel's career. It is also so emblematic of Buñuel as a whole. As described by some of the actors, it feels like a film that is filled with force and energy and life that might make it seem like a film of a young man. And it is that, but it is also a film that is filled with the ripeness and the intelligence and the forcefulness of Buñuel and his life and his perspective and philosophy. So, as I say, it seems to be in and of itself a collection of contradictions. It is many things at once. It is so many things wrapped in this package that is the brilliant cinematic expression by the one, the only Luis Buñuel in this film from 1974, which is called The Phantom of Liberty. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.